Dante Calabrese was against the cold face of the Meridian Laundry's steam press at 3 in the morning on a Friday, and the press was off, and the room carried the residue of a smell that had been building in its walls for 20 years. Hot cotton and machine oil and the specific mineral cold of steam that has gone still. And both of his hands were shaking against his thighs in a way they had not shaken since he was a boy and had broken something that could not be unbroken. Ellsworth Johnson stood in front of him, and he was smiling. Not the smile of a man who is satisfied or pleased. Not warmth, not triumph, not the expression of a man who has won something he was uncertain about winning. The specific, architectural smile of a man who completed every calculation available in the room before anyone else in it understood the first variable, and who has been composed enough to wait for the arithmetic to deliver itself. He held a small paperback book in his left hand, its cover softened by 11 months of being carried in a canvas bag, its spine cracked in 3 places from being repeatedly opened to the same pages, and he turned it once in his hand, the way a man turns an object he recognizes and intends to return to exactly the person it belongs to. Henry Polk had come to the mouth of the 126th Street service alley at 3:14 in the morning because he had been at the back of his shoe repair shop when he heard the cars and had looked out and followed the sound with the instinct that 31 years on this block builds in a man who pays attention. He had gotten as far as the alley entrance before he saw who was going in last through the laundry's service door, and he had stopped with one hand flat against the brick wall of the building beside him, and he had not moved. "That man," he said quietly, to the alley and to no one in it, "does not smile for nothing." 6 men had come to 126th Street 3 days earlier carrying the name of Lucky Luciano like a credential stamped on paper they expected doors to open for. They had issued a demand against Bumpy Johnson's West Side operation in the direct, non-negotiating language of men who have been told they have the protection of a name that has never failed to function as protection. They had taken one of Bumpy's men into the back room of this laundry, and put a lit cigarette against his left eye and told him to carry the message to Bumpy, and told him what would happen to his daughter and his brother if he went to the police. 5 of those 6 men were already in the room behind Dante Calabrese. Dante was the 6th, and he had not stopped speaking since Bumpy's men brought him through the service door, cycling through every offer and name and structural argument in his possession without understanding that every item had already been considered and set aside by the man in front of him hours before the door opened. Bumpy turned the study manual once more. The smile did not change. 6 men came to this block with a name they thought was a shield. This is how that ended. In the summer and autumn of 1951, the United States Senate's Special Committee to Investigate Crime in Interstate Commerce, the Kefauver Committee, named for the Tennessee senator who had spent the previous year holding nationally televised hearings on organized crime, completed its published findings and delivered them to the American public as a revelation of concealed architecture. The hearings had produced, for the first time in the collective public record, a detailed and named accounting of the national structure of the crime families, the territories, the tribute networks, the political connections, the financial flows. The committee chairman described it as the exposure of a second government operating beneath the visible one. Newspapers ran the findings on their front pages for a week. What the Kefauver Committee's findings said nothing about was Harlem. Lucky Luciano had been deported from the United States to Italy in February of 1946 following the commutation of his sentence by Governor Dewey, and his removal from the country created a contest among the remaining New York families for the territories and tribute flows he had previously overseen, shared, or sanctioned. Harlem's numbers operation, the informal financial infrastructure that the black residents of that neighborhood had built across 3 decades because no bank would extend credit to them, no licensed financial institution served them, and no legitimate commercial apparatus had ever been constructed to include them, was among the most consistently productive revenue streams in the entire northeastern operation of the organized crime structure. It was productive precisely because it had been built by people who had no alternative to it, and who were entirely without institutional protection if a family decided to absorb it by force. The police precincts of Upper Manhattan did not investigate crimes committed within the numbers economy as crimes. They classified them, when they classified them at all, as disputes between competing criminal enterprises, self-correcting by definition, not requiring external resolution. A man whose eye was destroyed in the back room of a laundry was a numbers runner who had been in a dispute with other numbers runners. The case opened and closed in the same conversation. The structure standing between the Harlem operation and complete absorption by the Italian families in 1951 was not a law. It was not an institution. It was not a congressman or a precinct captain or a civil rights organization. It was one man in a formal suit who had worked those streets since the late 1920s, and whose authority had been tested with sufficient frequency that most serious operators in the New York organized crime structure had arrived at a shared understanding of what testing it again would produce. Most serious operators. Tuesday, September 18, 1951. 10:45 a.m. 126th Street and Lenox Avenue, Harlem. September in Harlem held heat past the official end of summer, the kind of heat that came up from the pavement and off the brick faces of the buildings and had nowhere to disperse in the tight vertical columns of air between them, and on 126th Street that morning it mixed with the smell that always came from the Meridian Laundry when the press machines were running at full capacity. Hot cotton and the flat iron smell of steam under pressure, a dense, industrial warmth that settled in the throat and tasted of effort. The laundry's front door was propped open with a wooden wedge, and the sound of the press came out through it in its repetitive industrial sequence, the hiss of steam under pressure, the thud of the pressing surface coming down, a brief silence, and then the hiss again. The rhythm of something that would not stop for anything that happened on the street in front of it. Solomon Reeves came around the corner of 126th and Lenox at 10:45 with a canvas collection bag over his left shoulder, and the September warmth already working at the back of his collar. He was 34 years old, medium height, wearing a short-sleeved dress shirt with the top button open and the collar standing away from his neck, and he had the build of a man who had done physical work since he was 14 and whose body had organized itself around this fact without accumulating excess, lean through the shoulders and forearms, the economy of muscle that belongs to men who have never had the option of not using it. He had his electrician's study manual in the right outside pocket of his canvas bag, a paperback preparation guide for the New York State Class B electrician licensing examination, its cover rubbed pale at the corners, its spine cracked in 3 places from being opened to the same pages. Its pages marked in 4 places with strips of folded paper. He had been carrying it for 11 months. He was going to be an electrician. Not in the imprecise way a man attaches a future to himself to make the present more bearable. The operational way. He had passed the first 2 sections of the state licensing examination at a vocational night school in the Bronx, and he had enrolled in the 3rd-year course that started in October, and he had spoken to a man named Gerald Porter who ran a supply warehouse on Amsterdam Avenue about purchasing inventory at cost when he was ready to open. He was going to build an electrical contracting business that employed men from the neighborhood who had no other access to a licensed trade, men whose names were not going to appear on any apprenticeship list from any union that existed in New York in 1951 because the unions had made their position on those names clear enough. He had explained this to his brother James one Tuesday night in July, sitting on the stoop of the building on 118th Street where they had both grown up, and James had listened and had been quiet for a long moment, and then said it sounded exactly like the kind of thing Soul would design. He was on his 4th stop of the morning when the car stopped. You know the car before the doors open. There is a quality to the way it sits at the curb when no one who is parked should be sitting at the curb, a specific stillness in an otherwise moving block, and the beat of silence that opens between the engine cutting and whatever comes next produces a physical response that runs ahead of the analysis. 2 men out of the passenger side. 2 more from the rear. 1 from the driver's side. And the 6th from the back seat of the second car that had been in the traffic 2 lengths behind the first, which Soul had not looked for because he had had no reason to look for a car that was following him. The 6th man was Dante Calabrese. He was 44 years old, broad through the chest and upper back, with a round, closely shaved face and carefully arranged hair that communicated the effort that had gone into it. His hands were his primary communicative instrument, They moved with constant specificity when he spoke, mapping distances, measuring dimensions, drawing the boundaries of things he intended the other person to understand they were inside of. He used them the way some men use a title. He reached out as he walked towards Solomon Reeves and touched the strap of the canvas collection bag with 2 fingers, lightly, the gesture of a man placing a quiet claim on something he has already decided belongs to a different category of ownership. "Reeves," he said. His voice had the even, conversational register of a man who has no uncertainty about the outcome of the conversation he is beginning. "I have a message for Bumpy Johnson." Sol's right hand went to the bag strap, not over Dante's 2 fingers but beside them, its presence there as a statement rather than a defense. "I run a route," Sol said. "I don't relay messages." Dante Calabrese's expression produced the mild recalibration of a man whose expectation has been confirmed rather than contradicted. "You relay this one," he said. "The West Side operation, the runners, the banks, the book, all of it, it transfers to us by Friday." "Not a conversation. A transfer." He withdrew his 2 fingers from the bag strap and placed them on Sol's left forearm, a brief, proprietary contact, the touch of a man marking something he expects to receive. "Luciano's blessing, direct from Naples." "This is already done." Sol looked at Dante's fingers on his arm. He looked at the 5 men in their lateral positioning around him. His jaw tightened once and did not move again. "I'm walking away from this corner now," Sol said. Dante Calabrese's fingers tightened on Sol's forearm. "No," he said. He indicated the Meridian Laundry's open door with his free hand. The unhurried sweep of a man indicating a destination that has already been determined. "You are going to walk inside." The press machine made its hiss and thud from the open doorway, and Nico Ferretti and Aldo Bianchi came from behind and took Sol's arms, and the movement from the sidewalk into the laundry's entrance took 6 seconds, and the door that was propped open with the wooden wedge swung back behind them and the wedge fell and the door closed. Sunday, September 16, 1951. 10:30 p.m. Back room, Café Napoli, 108th Street. The back room of Café Napoli locked from the inside with a bar that lowered into 2 iron brackets, and when the bar was down the room absorbed the kitchen and table noise from the front of the restaurant into a low, irrelevant background. Dante Calabrese had been at the round table in the center of the room for 20 minutes when the last of his men came in, and the 6 of them, Ferretti and Bianchi at the table, Renato Esposito and Marco Lavecchia against the east wall, Carlo Trucci by the shelf where Dante kept 3 bottles of Burlo, Dante himself standing, filled the room in the specific way of men who have been in this configuration before. Dante had a yellow legal pad on the table and a ballpoint pen, and he was writing names on the legal pad in a compact, forward-leaning hand. Not his men's names. The route names. Reeves S. 126th Lenox. Morgan T. 128th 8th. Collins R. 124th 7th. He drew a horizontal line beneath each name, and wrote a number beside it representing the estimated weekly collection. "Tuesday morning," he said. The pen moved. "We go to the 126th stop first because that stop is the principal runner, and the principal runner carries the message. We make the 126th point first, and we make it clearly enough that the message does not need to be repeated at the other stops." He looked at Ferretti. "Nico and Aldo bring the runner inside. The conversation inside is mine." He looked at Esposito. "Rennie and Marco go to the 128th stop simultaneously, same message, no inside work." He tapped the legal pad with the pen's barrel. "Carlo, you are in the car on the east end of 126th. 1 car on each end of the block from the time we go in to the time we come out." He covered the sequence a second time without consulting the pad. No one in the room asked a question. "What if Johnson moves directly on this?" said Marco Lavecchia, the flat delivery of a man categorizing a logistical variable. Dante Calabrese set the pen down on the pad. He looked at the Burlo bottles on the shelf, then at the room. "Johnson operates in Harlem because the families have permitted it. He has no structure above him. He has no name he can put on the table that is higher than what is backing this operation. We have Lucky's blessing from Naples. Luciano made this call from Italy and it stands. He picked up the pen. He drew a second line under Reeves' S, pressing down enough that the line was visible through the sheet beneath it. These people have no recourse. That is a condition of their situation. It is not an interpretation. He capped the pen. He folded the legal pad and placed it in his jacket's interior breast pocket. He looked at Trucci and made the small gesture that indicated the Barolo. Carlo Trucci opened the nearest bottle and poured 3 glasses. Tuesday, September 18, 1951. 11:14 a.m. Back room, Meridian Laundry, 126th Street. The back room of the Meridian Laundry was a narrow space, 8 feet wide and 12 feet long, separated from the pressing floor by a plywood partition with a door that rested in its frame without latching. The dominant physical presence in the room was the Hoffman industrial steam press against the back wall, a chest-height commercial unit with a flat pressing surface in the closed position, its heating element at full operating temperature, the heat from it a presence felt across the full width of the narrow room, not warmth but the specific declaration of a surface that will damage. The smell was complete: hot cotton, machine oil, the mineral sharpness of steam at pressure, the faint sweetness of sizing from freshly pressed fabric. From the other side of the plywood partition, the press on the floor operated in its cycle. Hiss, thud, silence, hiss again, a sound that covered everything else in the back room with a mechanical layer that would not acknowledge what happened beneath it. Nico Ferretti held Solomon Reeves against the back wall with both hands at Sol's shoulders. Aldo Bianchi had Sol's right arm above the elbow. Renato Esposito stood at the partition door. Dante Calabrese stood in the center of the narrow room with his hands at his sides, which was the specific and practiced absence of gesture that he employed when he needed to communicate that the conversational portion of a meeting had concluded. Sol's canvas collection bag had fallen to the floor at Bianchi's feet when his arm was taken. "Here is how this proceeds," Dante said. His voice was the voice of a man delivering a schedule rather than an ultimatum. "You leave this room, you walk to wherever Johnson is today, you tell him the West Side operation, the runners, the banks, the book, all accounts, transfers to us by next Friday. The men who work the routes continue to work them. The collections continue. We manage the distribution. This is the offer, and it is the only offer, and it is not contingent on Johnson's response because his response has already been factored into the arrangement." Sol's breathing was the measured, reduced breathing of a man managing the physical pressure of the hold, and allocating his air carefully. "He won't do it," Sol said. The steadiness of his voice was an act of will with a visible cost. Dante's right hand rose from his side and indicated the steam press with a single, opening gesture, palm out, fingers spread, the direction unmistakable. The specific declaration of a surface that will damage. The smell was complete: hot cotton, machine oil, the mineral sharpness of steam at pressure, the faint sweetness of sizing from freshly pressed fabric. From the other side of the plywood partition, the press on the floor operated in its cycle. Hiss, thud, silence, hiss again, a sound that covered everything else in the back room with a mechanical layer that would not acknowledge what happened beneath it. Nico Ferretti held Solomon Reeves against the back wall with both hands at Sol's shoulders. Aldo Bianchi had Sol's right arm above the elbow. Renato Esposito stood at the partition door. Dante Calabrese stood in the center of the narrow room with his hands at his sides, which was the specific and practiced absence of gesture that he employed when he needed to communicate that the conversational portion of a meeting had concluded. Sol's canvas collection bag had fallen to the floor at Bianchi's feet when his arm was taken. "Here is how this proceeds," Dante said. His voice was the voice of a man delivering a schedule rather than an ultimatum. "You leave this room, you walk to wherever Johnson is today, you tell him the West Side operation, the runners, the banks, the book, all accounts, transfers to us by next Friday. The men who work the routes continue to work them. The collections continue. We manage the distribution. This is the offer, and it is the only offer, and it is not contingent on Johnson's response because his response has already been factored into the arrangement." Sol's breathing was the measured, reduced breathing of a man managing the physical pressure of the hold, and allocating his air carefully. "He won't do it," Soul said. The steadiness of his voice was an act of will with a visible cost. Dante's right hand rose from his side and indicated the steam press with a single, opening gesture, palm out, fingers spread, the direction unmistakable. He picked up the study manual from the floor where it had slid and held it by its spine and read the title without expression. He looked at Soul against the wall, both hands over his face now, Ferretti holding him at the shoulders. He looked at the manual. The left corner of Dante's mouth moved. "An electrician," he said. He placed the study manual back into the bag's right exterior pocket. He stood. He straightened his jacket with a pull at each lapel. "You have until next Friday," he said. "You tell Bumpy Johnson the transfer happens or the next conversation involves his entire West Side network and every person connected to it. You go to the police." He paused for the duration of a single breath. "And we visit your brother James at the docks and your daughter at her school. We have both addresses and both schedules. That is not a threat. That is a description of the available sequence." He walked through the partition door. Ferretti followed, then Bianchi, then Esposito. The door rested back in its frame without latching, and from the other side the press made its hiss and thud, and Solomon Reeves was alone in the back room of the Meridian Laundry with both hands over his face and his study manual in the bag on the floor, and 11 minutes before he was able to stand up straight. Tuesday, September 18, 1951. 2:05 p.m. Harlem Hospital, Emergency Ward. The intake nurse wrote in the chart with the even, unaccelerated hand of someone who records what is present without commentary: thermal burn injury to the left eyelid and cornea, 2nd and 3rd degree, with confirmed penetrating injury to the left globe, causation consistent with direct contact of lit cigarette, fracturing to the 2nd and 4th ribs on the right side consistent with blunt force impact. Laceration to the left side of the forehead above the hairline, approximately 1.5 inches in length, soft tissue bruising and compression damage to both forearms at the grip points. Consistent with restraint. The ophthalmology resident who examined the eye was 4 months out of his residency and wrote his assessment in the specific, precise language of someone trained to say exactly what was present without what was not present. The left globe was not salvageable. Enucleation was required within 48 hours to prevent sympathetic response in the right eye. Solomon Reeves lay on the examination table with a sterile pad taped over the left eye socket, and his right eye open and fixed on a point on the ceiling directly above him. He was not moving. His right hand lay flat on the table at his side, and along the edge of the index finger, where 11 months of turning pages had produced a specific callus, the skin was reddened from the grip that had been on that arm. James Reeves arrived at the ward at 2:41. He was 41 years old, 6 feet 2, in his longshoreman's work clothes. He had left the pier when the call came and had not gone home and had not changed. He stood in the doorway of the examination room for a specific duration, not the duration of someone processing shock but of someone completing an assessment, and then he crossed to the side of the examination table and placed both hands on the metal bed railing, not gripping, flat and pressed down with the full weight of his palms, the hands of a man applying counterforce to a surface that cannot be moved. He had carried a rifle across 3 river crossings in the Injun River Valley during 16 months in Korea, and his hands carried the residue of that in the way they settled. Soul's right eye moved to his brother. Soul's right hand came across the table and found James's left hand on the railing. When Soul spoke, his voice was the voice of a man who has identified the single most important sentence available to him, and has set aside everything else to deliver it without deviation. "James," he said. "Don't. You hear me. You go after these men and you spend the rest of your life in a cell or in a box, and everything I have been working on for 11 months is the route of a man who built nothing. Don't." A pause, the pause of a man costing a breath against the ribs. "You finish the course. You finish it in my place. The business opens." James's hands on the railing did not move. 2 detectives from the 32nd Precinct arrived at 3:18. Detective Arnold Kell, 51 years old, and a younger man named Hadley who kept his notes in a wire-bound green-covered notebook. Kell sat in the chair beside the bed, took Sol's account from beginning to end, asked 2 questions, the specific time and which laundry, and read the ophthalmologist's note on the chart clipboard at the foot of the bed. He looked at Hadley. "Numbers Operation Assault," he said. "Runner dispute. One organization's internal matter against another's. The DA will not file on this." He stood. He looked at Sol. "You know what line of work you are in. This is what that line of work produces when it produces trouble. Case stays open, but there is nothing in it I can move." He set his hat on his head with 2 fingers at the brim. He and Hadley left. James's right hand had come off the railing while Kell was speaking and was now at his side, palm open, fingers either closed into a fist nor relaxed into rest, held in the specific intermediate position of a decision that had not yet been made but was narrowing. Tuesday, September 18, 1951. 4:22 p.m. 120th Street, Bumpy's operational office above the Velvet Room's social club. Ellsworth Johnson was at the table with the week's collection sheets when Luther Briggs came in from the hallway. Luther entered the room in the way that distinguished one category of news from another. He came in fully, the door closed behind him without being pushed to close, his feet found a position and stayed in it. His hat was in his right hand, not on the rack beside the door where it went by fixed habit in this room on every other occasion. Bumpy set his pen down on the collection sheet. Luther gave him the account from the first car, the time, the cars, the 6 men, the name Dante Calabrese, the Meridian Laundry, what the intake nurse at Harlem Hospital had written in the chart, and the ophthalmologist's specific finding. He had 3 sources, all of them confirmed within the 4 hours since the incident. A woman who worked the pressing cart at the Meridian and had heard everything through the plywood partition, a contact at Harlem Hospital who had read the chart and the attached notes, and a man on the 126th corner who had watched the arrival and departure, and had a memory for faces and cars. Luther delivered everything without interpretation, in the order it had happened. Bumpy's jaw moved once. His left hand, which had been resting on the edge of the collection sheet, placed the sheet flat on the table with a measured, unhurried press. Both hands came together on the table's surface and folded. He looked at the wall behind Luther's left shoulder for 5 seconds. "Who sent them?" he said. "Calabrese is the operator. He is running the operation through the Genovese structure. The backing is Luciano from Naples. Calabrese has been saying to multiple people on 108th Street that this move carries Lucky's direct blessing. How many men total?" 6. Calabrese, Ferretti, Bianchi, Esposito, Lavecchia, Trucci. Ferretti and Bianchi were the inside men. "Where does Calabrese meet?" "Back room at Café Napoli on 108th. Consistent operation. Sunday nights and Saturday nights." Bumpy unfolded his hands. He placed them flat on the table, one on each side of the collection sheet. He named Raymond Oates, and told Luther what Oates was to have in position, and where and by what time the next morning. He named Calvin Pierce and gave Luther 2 sentences of specific instruction for Pierce covering a different component of the preparation. He named a 3rd man and gave Luther 1 sentence that required no elaboration. "Who else?" Bumpy said. "What else did they touch?" Luther took a folded paper from his inside jacket pocket and set it on the table. "There was a 16-year-old runner on the 128th and 8th stop. They did not put hands on him. He handed the collection over and they let him walk. But they took his route book, which gives them the account names, addresses, and schedules for every stop on the 128th stretch." Bumpy picked up the paper. He read it for 40 seconds without moving, standing at the table with the paper in both hands. He set it down. "Sol's bag," he said. "The laundry. Where is it?" Luther told him. The woman who worked the pressing cart had put the bag in the back room's storage closet before the police arrived and had locked the closet and kept the key. "Get it," Bumpy said. "The manual in particular." The canvas collection bag was on the table in front of Bumpy at 6:15 in the evening, study manual and all, the 4 paper strip page markers still in place. Wednesday, September 19, 1951. 8:15 a.m. 120th Street, Bumpy's operational office. James Reeves came through the door without knocking. He was wearing the same longshoreman's work clothes from the previous day, which meant he had not been home and had not slept, and what 18 hours without sleep following what had happened at the hospital had done to the architecture of his face was the same thing that 16 months in Korea had previously done to it. The specific quiet that settles over the features of a man who has moved entirely past the deliberation stage, and is now in the stage that precedes directed action. He had a .45 caliber M1911 pistol in his right jacket pocket, the military-issue model he had carried across the Imjin River and brought home and kept because a man who has carried a pistol in that context does not easily return it to the categories of things that no longer belong to him. Luther Briggs was at the wall to the right of the door, hat in hand. Positioned and still. Bumpy was at the table, reading. He turned the current page to the next one before he looked up. James put the M1911 on the table between them, placed it, not dropped or slammed, barrel pointed sideways, the deliberate placement of a man making a statement about capability and intention that he does not intend to be misread. His right hand stayed beside the grip. Dante Calabrese takes lunch every weekday at a restaurant on 111th Street, James said. His voice had the stripped, direct register of a man delivering a field assessment. I have been outside it since 6:30 this morning. I know the table. I know the entrance. I can be inside before noon today, and I understand how to move once I am inside. He paused 1 second. I am asking you to not stop me. What did Solomon say to you at the hospital? Bumpy said. James's right hand came off the pistol's grip and went to the edge of the table. His jaw worked once, closing and holding. He said don't, James said. He said finish the course, Bumpy said. He said the business opens. James looked at the table. His breathing adjusted by a fraction, the specific small adjustment of a man spending physical effort to maintain a position that his body is no longer offering to maintain voluntarily. Bumpy stood from the table. He moved to James's side of it without urgency, picked up the M1911 by the barrel, walked to the left side desk drawer, placed the pistol inside, and closed the drawer. He came back and sat on the edge of the table with his feet flat on the floor and his arms loose at his sides. Walk me through what actually happens, he said. Not what you intend to happen. The actual sequence of events after you walk into that restaurant. James was looking at the window. His hands were flat on his thighs. You do not come out, Bumpy said. That is the first version. Or you do come out, and before the week ends the conversation they told Solomon would happen at his daughter's school. And at your doc's schedule gets held. The one with the addresses they already have. He reached to the corner of the table and picked up Soul's study manual and held it open in both hands, the 4 paper strips visible at their marked pages. Solomon Reeves spent 11 months carrying this manual on a route so he could pass an exam so he could build a business that employed men from this neighborhood who have no union card and no apprenticeship access. He told you in July what he was going to call it. He held the manual out. Building is harder than destroying and it outlasts every outcome that destroying produces. That is not sentiment. It is the only arithmetic that holds past the moment of acting. James looked at the manual for a long time. His right hand came up and took it. He held it in both hands, and the way his hands received it was the way hands receive something they are accepting into a different register of responsibility. I am going to close what needs to be closed, Bumpy said. After that is done, you are going to finish Solomon's course in his place, at his school, and you are going to sit for his examination and get his license, and you are going to open the business exactly as he described it. His name on the door, and his name on the van. I will provide the cost of opening. He paused. And I will bring you into the room when the accounting happens. You will come in and say what you came to say, and then you will walk out before anything else in that room begins. That is the sequence. James looked at the manual in his hands. All right, he said. Thursday, September 20th, 1951. 11:45 p.m. Back room, Café Napoli, 108th Street. The back room at Café Napoli had not changed since Sunday night. The same bar across the door brackets. The same Barolo shelf. The same deadened acoustic quality. Dante Calabrese had arrived at 11 with all 5 of his men, Ferretti and Bianchi at the table, Esposito and Lavecchia against the east wall. Trucci at the bar shelf with the second Barolo bottle already open, and this specific Saturday configuration had been confirmed by Calvin Pierce through his contact on 108th at 9:30 that evening, which was the confirmation that had made Thursday night the night rather than Sunday. Dante had his jacket off and draped over his chair and his sleeves rolled to the forearm and his third glass of Barolo in front of him, and he was in the middle of an account of a horse at Aqueduct named Copper Admiral who had come in at 11-1 on the strength of a tip from a man in Flushing named Lenny Caruso, and his hands were making the horse run across the surface of the table. The forefinger and middle finger of each hand doing the gallop, his hands describing the stretch and the final turn and the wire with the specificity of a man who uses his hands to make everything he describes more vivid and more present than the room already makes it. The men at the table and against the wall were producing the laughter that comes from men who laugh because the configuration of the evening requires it. Carlo Trucci heard it first. The sound was the bar in its brackets shifting under external pressure, a sound that had no physical origin in the room's available mechanics because the bar was down, and no one from outside should have known the geometry of the brackets well enough to apply pressure at the correct angle through the door's thickness. Trucci's right hand went to the Barolo bottle and held it there, not drinking, the hand of a man anchoring himself to the nearest available object because a sound has entered the room that does not belong in it. The door opened. 3 men came through it who had not come through the restaurant. They placed themselves in the room with the economy of men who have already mapped its dimensions and every person's position before the door opened, and the man on the left had something at his right side that was low and held with purpose. And Ferretti, who was rising from his chair, completed the assessment before he completed the rise and sat back down and placed both hands flat on the table with a deliberateness that communicated its meaning without requiring a spoken translation. The hallway door opened 14 seconds afterward. 2 more men. Bianchi had an empty glass in his right hand and he put it down on the shelf behind him when the nearer of the 2 hallway men indicated it should go down. Esposito went completely still against the east wall. Lavecchia's hands came up to chest height in the flat, open position that has carried the same meaning in every room in every country for as long as rooms have held men with things in their hands. Trucci remained at the bar shelf, both hands visible, the Barolo bottle on the surface in front of him. Dante Calabrese had not stood up. His hands had stilled above the table, the galloping horse suspended mid-stride, the forefinger and middle finger of each hand held in the air where the wire had not yet been crossed, and then they came down slowly and rested flat on the table. His eyes went to his 5 men, to the positions they were now in, to the men positioned between them and both doors, and then to the main door, which opened a 3rd time. Ellsworth Johnson came in. He was wearing a black suit, white shirt, gray tie, and black leather shoes that made the specific unhurried sound of a man who has allocated the correct amount of time for each step and therefore has no urgency in any of them. He walked directly to the round table, to the chair at its head, Dante's chair, with Dante's jacket draped over its back, pulled it out, and sat in it. He placed Solomon Reeves's study manual on the table where the Barolo bottle had been, in the center, where everyone in the room could see it. And he was smiling. The same smile from the calculation he had completed before any of this began, the specific, structurally held smile of a man who finished the arithmetic in this room hours before anyone else in it understood the first variable, and who has been sufficiently patient to wait for the room to catch up. He placed both hands flat on the table on either side of the study manual, and the smile held without maintenance, without a single muscular adjustment, and it did not change for the duration of what followed, and Dante Calabrese looked at it, and the response that his body had been preparing in his throat, the laugh, the opening offer, the first sentence of the negotiation, did not arrive. "This is a misunderstanding that has a resolution," Dante said. The hands that had been making the horse run were flat on the table now, and without them his voice sounded smaller than he had ever heard it in a room he controlled. A revenue arrangement rather than a transfer. You retain full operational authority. We take a position in the distribution channel only. The numbers stay yours. You had access to the West Side runners and the 126th operation, Bumpy said. Past tense. Dante's hands moved 1 inch toward Bumpy across the table's surface and stopped. Luciano's blessing. This operation carries Lucky's personal sanction from Naples. You understand what that means for everyone in this room and for everyone they are connected to. You had Lucky Luciano's name, Bumpy said. The smile did not change. Luciano is in Italy. Past tense. Dante's left hand lifted slightly off the table and returned. The Genovese family is behind this operation in its entirety. The family. Not one man. Not one approval. The structure. You move against what is in this room, and you are moving against the architecture of the entire family and everything it connects to in this city. His voice had changed register, something moving through it from below. That is a factual description of the physics of this situation. You had the Genovese family behind this operation, Bumpy said. Past tense. Dante looked at his 5 men in their managed positions. He looked at the men positioned between them and both doors. He looked at the study manual on the table between him and Bumpy. He looked at Bumpy's face, and the smile on it that had not moved position since the door opened. I have a family, Dante said. His voice had reached its floor. A daughter. A wife. They have nothing to do with any part of this. I am asking you as one man to another man. Solomon Reeves had both of his eyes, Bumpy said. Past tense. He picked up the study manual from the table. He stood. Henry Polk was on 108th Street at 12:19 in the morning, carrying a pair of boots he had stayed late to finish because a customer needed them before Sunday, when 4 cars came out of the service alley beside Café Napoli in a formation with no space between any of them, moving north at the even, unhurried pace of a convoy that has already accomplished what it came to accomplish. The streetlight on the near corner caught the glass of the lead car's side window as it passed, and Polk saw who was in the front seat. He stopped walking. He stood on the sidewalk with the boot bag in his left hand and did not resume walking until all 4 cars had completed the turn at the far corner and gone. Dante Calabrese was in the second car. Both his hands were pressed together in his lap, and he had not stopped speaking since Bumpy's men walked him out of the back room of Café Napoli, cycling through every name and offer and structural argument he had left, not understanding that the man in the first car had already accounted for all of them. Friday, September 21, 1951. 3 a.m. Back room, Meridian Laundry, 126th Street. The back room of the Meridian Laundry carried the same smell it had carried on Tuesday morning: hot cotton and machine oil and the mineral residue of steam that has been at pressure so long it has entered the pores of the plaster and the grain of the plywood partition. The press was off now. Its flat surface was closed and had been cooling since the last pressing shift at 8 in the evening, and it held the specific diminishing warmth of heavy industrial equipment that has been at temperature all day and been powered down, still carrying heat at its edges, the center surface at room temperature. Its presence in the narrow room unchanged except for the absence of the sound and the absence of the specific declaration of its heat. The same plywood partition. The same door that rested in its frame without latching. The same floor where Solomon Reeves's canvas bag had hit and the study manual had slid out on Tuesday morning. 6 battery lanterns had been placed on the floor along the partition wall at even intervals, and their light came upward from the floor level and gave the narrow room a quality of definition that no overhead source could have produced, every surface and every face in the room sharper and more completely present than daylight renders anything, the specific clarifying quality of light that comes from below and leaves nothing in shadow. 6 men stood along the back wall where Ferretti had held Solomon Reeves's shoulders on Tuesday morning. Bumpy set the study manual on the flat surface of the cold steam press and stood behind it. He opened the manual to the first of the 4 marked pages and looked at it. He looked at what was marked and what was written in the margin in a compact hand, and then he closed the manual and placed it flat on the press surface. He took the folded sheet of paper from Luther, 6 names in block capital letters, with the assigned positions written beside each one, and placed it on the closed manual. Dante Calabrese was the first name on the sheet. James Reeves entered the back room at 3:14 in the morning. He was wearing a white shirt and dark trousers, different from the longshoreman's clothes of the previous 2 days, a deliberate change. The specific act of a man who has decided what register this occasion belongs to. He carried nothing. He walked into the narrow space between Bumpy and the 6 men against the back wall, and he looked at Dante Calabrese, and then he looked at each of the 5 men beside Dante in turn, and what his face did during those seconds was the accumulated product of 3 days of something that was not sleeping and was not processing in any of the ways that word is typically used. 3 days of sitting with what Solomon had said at the hospital in the posture of a man trying to honor an instruction from someone he loves who cannot currently enforce it himself. He turned toward the 6 men along the back wall. When he spoke, his voice was level in the way that voices are level when all alternatives have been fully considered and set down. "My brother is 34 years old," he said. "He came to work on a Tuesday morning with a study manual in his bag and a licensing examination he had been preparing for over 11 months and a specific address he had spoken to a landlord about, and a specific name he had already decided to put on the door and on the van." He stopped. He looked at each man. He had passed 2 of the 4 required examination sections. He was registered to begin his 3rd-year preparation course in October. He had told me in July what the business would be called and what it would do and who it would employ. His voice remained in the same register. "Solomon Reeves Electrical." He picked up the study manual from the press surface. He held it in both hands, the cover facing outward so the title was visible. "You put a cigarette in his eye," he said to Dante Calabrese. "You put his manual back in his bag and said he had until Friday. You thought that was a conclusion." He looked at the manual. He looked at Dante. "The business is going to open. His name is going on the door, and his name is going on the van. I'm going to learn everything in this manual, and sit for his examination and get his license and build what he described, and the men in this neighborhood are going to work in it. They are going to have a way in." He held the manual up. "You did not stop anything. You delayed something. That is the only distinction between what you did and what you thought you did." He lowered the manual. He looked at the 6 men one final time, each of them. He walked to the partition door. He pushed it open. He walked through the laundry's pressing floor and out through the front door, and the front door made its sound, and the sound of his footsteps on the sidewalk outside diminished to nothing. Bumpy waited until the last of it was gone. Then he picked up the folded sheet of paper from the press surface. He read the first name aloud. Dante Calabrese stood against the back wall, in the position Solomon Reeves had occupied on Tuesday morning, and the same implement that had been used in this room 3 days before was applied to each of his eyes in the sequence of a man performing a procedure with efficiency rather than ceremony, and the sounds the room produced were the same sounds, and the smell was the same smell. And the consequence was complete and permanent and bilateral. Nico Ferretti. 1 sentence. 1 sound. Aldo Bianchi, who had held the cigarette on Tuesday morning. 1 sentence. Renato Esposito. Marco Lavecchia. Carlo Trucci, who had been in the car on 126th Street when Solomon Reeves's bag hit the floor and the study manual slid out. 6 names. 6 sentences. The same back wall. They walked out of the Meridian Laundry at 4:11 in the morning, all 6 of them, upright, ambulatory, moving through the front door and onto 126th Street in the early dark. Not one of them saw 126th Street. Friday, September 21, 1951. 8:45 a.m. Back room, Meridian Laundry, 126th Street. Detective Raymond Cook of the 32nd Precinct arrived at the back room of the Meridian Laundry at 8:45 in the morning. 41 minutes after a man who gave the dispatcher a false name and a working address called in and described the location and what was in it and hung up. Cook was 45 years old, 19 years on the force, and he walked the narrow room once from the partition door to the cold steam press and back again at the measured pace of a man making a classification rather than an investigation. He lit a cigarette at the door. His partner, a detective named Willis who was still new enough to write the full date at the top of each notes page before beginning, had his notebook open. Willis wrote for approximately 70 seconds and looked up. "Classification," Willis said. Cook looked at the press. He looked at the floor. He looked at the wall. "Organized crime, internal," he said. One side of the number structure addressing the other side. Not a matter for the DA and not a matter that will produce a cooperating witness. He dropped the cigarette and stepped on it. These situations within the organized structure resolve themselves. Case stays open but it goes nowhere. Willis wrote it down verbatim, which was a habit Cook had discouraged twice without success. Cook walked out of the back room and did not return to it. At 11:25 that morning, a Genovese family capo named Victor Albanese, who operated a wholesale produce business on East 106th as a legitimate commercial enterprise, arrived at a luncheonette on 122nd Street and took the booth at the far end from the window. He waited 8 minutes before a man who worked for Bumpy sat down across from him. Albanese placed an envelope on the table between the sugar caddy and the 2 coffee cups and looked at the man across from him with the expression of a man delivering a resolution that has already been recorded elsewhere. The West Side Corridor, the 126th operation, and all associated collection and distribution networks operate under Mr. Johnson's authority, Albanese said. What occurred this past week was the action of an individual operator who overstepped the family's authorization. That operator is no longer in a position to act in any capacity. The family's acknowledgement of the existing territorial arrangement is permanent, and is not subject to future revision. The man across from him looked at the envelope. He looked at Albanese. "The 6 men," he said. Albanese moved his coffee cup 1 inch toward the window and left his hand on it. He looked out at 122nd Street. "There are no 6 men," he said. "There is a laundry on 126th Street where something occurred that this family will not account for and will not explain. That position is also permanent." He removed his hand from the cup. "Those are the terms." The man who worked for Bumpy took the envelope from the table, placed it inside his jacket, and left the booth. Solomon Reeves underwent surgical enucleation of the left eye at Harlem Hospital on September 20, 1951, 2 days after admission, and was fitted with a prosthetic eye in February of 1952. He returned to his third-year electrician's course in January of 1953, passed his third and fourth examination sections by June of that year, and sat for the full New York State licensing examination in October of 1953. He passed on the first attempt. His vocational instructor noted in a letter to the school's director that it was the highest score the program had produced in 8 years. Solomon Reeves never returned to running a numbers route. Every Thursday morning from 1952 onward, he left his house with his study manual in the inside pocket of his jacket, the same paperback, same 4 marked pages, same pale corners, and he told his daughter Lily once, in 1961, that carrying the weight of it was the same as remembering what the weight was for. Detective Arnold Kell of the 32nd Precinct was transferred to a clerical position at a Queens precinct in October of 1951 under circumstances that produced no formal explanation. In his personnel file, he completed his remaining 20 years on the force without taking another Harlem assignment. He maintained the practice of arriving at his desk exactly on time, which his colleagues noted as a mark of reliability, and which he did not comment on. Detective Raymond Cook kept the Meridian Laundry case designated as an open organized crime dispute for 11 years without filing a charge or conducting an additional interview. He retired in 1963. In the years between 1951 and his retirement, he filed 3 additional case closures using language that was verbatim from the entry Willis had written in the laundry's back room: organized crime, internal, self-resolving. Victor Albanese operated the wholesale produce business on East 106th until federal pressure, following the Kefauver hearings' continued legal aftermath, forced a restructuring of the Genovese family's commercial operations in 1959. He moved to New Jersey in 1960 and died there in 1977. He sent no men into the West Side corridor of Harlem at any point after September of 1951. Henry Polk ran the shoe repair shop at 126th Street until 1971, when he sold it to a young man from the neighborhood who had apprenticed under him for 4 years. In the years after September 1951, he developed a specific practice on his morning walk to open the shop. He slowed his pace at the Meridian Laundry's service alley entrance, looked once at the back wall visible from the alley mouth, and continued walking without stopping. He told his wife once that the wall looked different to him than it had before September, and that the difference was not something he could describe to someone who had not been standing at the alley entrance at 3:14 in the morning on a Friday, carrying boots, following a sound. He attended the opening of S. Reeves Electrical in the spring of 1954, brought a wrap set of tools, and was among the last to leave. Ellsworth Johnson received no official or public acknowledgement of any event occurring between Tuesday, September 18 and Friday, September 21, 1951. He continued to operate in Harlem without territorial challenge from the Genovese or Luciano-connected structures for the remainder of the decade. Between 1951 and 1969 he funded 12 scholarships through informal channels for young men from Harlem who had the specific kind of ability that no institutional pathway was built to receive. The first of those scholarships covered the full program fees for a 41-year-old longshoreman named James Reeves enrolled in the New York State Class B electrician licensing program at a vocational school in the Bronx. James Reeves completed the program in June of 1953. He took the final examination in the same room at the same school where Solomon had taken his previous sections, at the desk Solomon had last used, which he had confirmed with the school's administrator and specifically requested. He received his New York State Class B electrician license in August of 1953 and opened S. Reeves Electrical at 1140 Amsterdam Avenue on March 4, 1954, Solomon Reeves's 37th birthday. He operated the business for 39 years. At its peak, in 1971, 14 licensed electricians worked for the company, all of them men from Harlem and the surrounding neighborhoods, most of them trained as apprentices by James directly because no union in New York in 1954 had offered them a path in. Soul's study manual rode in the glove compartment of the company van for all 39 years of operation, the same paperback, same 4 marked pages, same pale rubbed corners, and James could not have explained to any inspector who opened the compartment what a worn licensing examination guide was doing in a licensed contractor's vehicle, and he never had to. In 1963, when Lily Reeves enrolled in a nursing program upstate, James paid her first year's tuition from the business account. Without explaining to anyone in the family where the check had come from, which Solomon understood and did not require him to explain. Every March 4th, the business closed at noon. James drove the van to 126th Street and parked in front of the Meridian Laundry, and sat in the driver's seat for 30 minutes. He did not go inside. He looked at the front door of the laundry and at the service alley beside it, and he sat with the manual in the seat beside him rather than in the glove compartment on those particular days, and in 39 years of the practice he told no one why. S. Reeves Electrical is licensed and operating. 2 demands came to 126th Street in September of 1951. The first came in through the front door of a laundry on a Tuesday morning and produced its conclusion in the back room in 11 minutes, with one man's eye destroyed and a study manual placed back in a bag as punctuation. The second came in through the same back room 3 days later and produced its conclusion in 41 minutes. With 6 men walking out onto 126th Street in the early dark and not seeing it. Both demands were issued without institutional sanction, without legal standing, and without any mechanism of appeal. Both demands produced exactly the outcome the person issuing them intended. Whether what Ellsworth Johnson did in those 3 days constituted justice, or the precise application of symmetrical force to a situation that had been created by force and would not be corrected by any other means, or something that exists in a category for which the moral vocabulary of 1951, the vocabulary of courts and churches and civil rights briefs and congressional testimony, had no name because the institutions that generate names had already declined to apply any of their available names to what happened to Solomon Reeves on a Tuesday morning. That is not a question this account resolves. The answer belongs to the people who lived on 126th Street and understood what the protection of a man with a study manual and a patient smile had cost and what its absence would have produced instead. In 1951, 6 men arrived in Harlem carrying the name of a deported gangster like a permit, and what they demonstrated in the back room of a laundry was the same belief that the banks and the courts and the precinct houses had been encoding into their procedures and their case closures for decades, that the people who built the West Side operation had no recourse and no one standing for them. That belief was accurate about every institution available to Solomon Reeves. It was wrong about one man. Solomon Reeves deserved to sit for his licensing examination in October of 1951 with both of his eyes. If you believe that, drop a like on this video. If you understand why Bumpy Johnson smiled when he walked into that back room, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you do not miss the next account, because what ran on 126th Street in September of 1951 is still running, and it still matters. Solomon Reeves. His name is on the van.